Let's talk about the Nile River and why Egypt and Ethiopia have been fighting over it. But Egypt says its supply of water is in danger of drying up.
What happens when billions of tons of water with no salt are poured into one of the hottest and most barren places on Earth? It sounds like an impossible experiment, right? Yet, that's exactly what Egyptians have done, spilling massive amounts of unsalted water into the Sahara Desert. The result? Well, it's not what you might expect. While many would assume it would simply evaporate or disappear into the dry earth, the outcome defied logic. In this ambitious move, Egypt wasn't just trying to quench the thirst of the desert. They were testing something far more profound, something that could change the fate of entire ecosystems and millions of people. Stick around as we uncover the shocking results of this daring project and reveal how it could reshape agriculture, water management, and even global sustainability. Egypt's water crisis. Egypt is a country facing one of the most pressing water crises in the world. Despite being home to over 100 million people, nearly 95% of its land is desert, with the remaining 4% being fertile and arable. This small strip of land is where the entire population lives, mostly along the Nile River. However, this narrow green belt is not enough to support the rapidly growing population, which continues to increase at an alarming rate. As the population grows, Egypt finds itself increasingly reliant on its primary water source, the Nile, and is now looking for ways to overcome its limited land and water resources. The main challenge Egypt faces is its dependence on a single source of water, the Nile River. Around 90% of Egypt's population depends on the water from the Nile for drinking, irrigation, and industry. The Nile's water supply is already under stress, and as neighboring countries like Ethiopia build dams, it has created further tensions over water rights. With the Nile's flow threatened by upstream projects, Egypt is now urgently seeking alternatives to ensure its growing population has enough water and food. This is aggravated further by the fact that Egypt imports most of what it consumes. The country farmlands a paltry 4% of its land, a percentage that continues to shrink every passing year. This land is engulfed by city expansion, where its people highly depend on imported supplies. Foodstuff item constitutes about 40% of Egypt's import goods, in particular wheat sourced from Russia and Ukraine. These make Egypt susceptible to fluctuations in the global market, particularly a food price increase and a supply chain disruption that has been aggravated by geopolitical conflicts. With these challenges in mind, Egypt has initiated bold projects such as the new Delta Mega Project, which will ease the pressures on its agricultural sector by converting desert land into fertile farming areas. This project, through an artificial river and the building of infrastructure to support irrigation, provides water security, boosts food production, and reduces Egypt's dependency on foreign imports. But such a monumental effort has its various sets of problems, be it related to the environment or even finances, so the solution is urgent and complex. But the water crisis isn't the only pressure mounting on Egypt. There's another massive factor pushing the country to its limits, one that's growing faster than the Nile itself. The population explosion. Egypt's population has been growing at an unprecedented rate, creating a significant demographic challenge for the country. In February 2020, Egypt celebrated the birth of its 100 millionth citizen, a milestone that marked both a symbol of growth and a source of concern. From just 13.6 million people a century ago, Egypt's population has increased nearly tenfold, making it one of the most populous countries in the Arab world. By October 2022, the population had already reached 104 million, and experts predict that by 2030, it could hit 128 million, with further increases expected by 2050, potentially reaching 162 million. This rapid population growth presents both opportunities and severe challenges for the nation. One of the most significant consequences of this rapid population increase is the strain it places on Egypt's already limited land and resources. Currently, around 95% of the population resides on just 4% of the country's land, concentrated along the fertile banks of the Nile River and its delta. This small green belt, half the size of Ireland, is the only area that can support agriculture and human habitation. The vast majority of the country is desert, with no capacity for farming or habitation, meaning that the population is confined to a very narrow strip of land that is quickly becoming overcrowded. Moreover, the consumption of this scarce arable land through urbanization at such a high rate is worsening the situation. Since the cities keep expanding to absorb the ever-increasing population, much of the fertile farmland falls victim to being engulfed in the process of city expansion. For decades now, Egypt has been losing so much of its fertile land due to urban sprawl, and data from satellite imagery indicates this is gaining speed. While areas under agriculture decreased by 11% over the same period, there was an urbanization expansion in the Alexandrian region of 11% between 1987 and 2019. This rate of growth translates to red flag conditions about Egypt's ability to provide an adequate food supply for its growing population. This exacerbates another important demographic challenge to food security: critical population pressure. Imported foods constitute 40% of Egypt's imports. The country has been and currently stands at the top spot for wheat importing nations. Egypt must feed this drastically increasing population with a reduced agricultural footprint and finite resources. Consensuses of most experts are predicting that if that intervention is not made, Egypt will soon prove unsustainable. Thus, measures to fight those challenges are much needed. This response to some extent from government-involved initiatives with the new Delta mega project, whose aim was to secure food and water resources to generate benefits for more generations into future in Egypt. Egypt's geographical and agricultural challenges. Egypt's geographical challenges are at the heart of the country's struggle to support its rapidly growing population. While the majority of the world knows Egypt for its ancient history and iconic landmarks like the pyramids, the country's modern reality is defined by an overwhelming expanse of desert. Around 95% of the nation's land is arid and uninhabitable, leaving only a small portion along the Nile River and its delta capable of supporting human life and agriculture. This narrow strip of land, which accounts for only 4% of the total area, must sustain all of Egypt's population, which is now over 100 million. As the population grows, the pressure on this limited fertile land intensifies, making it increasingly difficult to meet the needs of the country's citizens. Agriculture is the most important sector for food security in Egypt, and these geographical conditions are highly limiting. Only 4% of the country's land is arable, and this percentage is decreasing with urbanization. As cities expand to accommodate the increasing population, they consume agricultural land, thereby eroding the country's ability to grow enough food domestically. Indeed, experts have calculated that Egypt is losing about 2% of its arable land every decade through urban sprawl. For example, between 1987 and 2019, the farmland area around Alexandria decreased by 11%, whereas the urban area increased by the same amount. It's quite a challenge for food production in the country because it is trying to balance its demand for food and dwindling agricultural capacity. Climate change has only made the agriculture problems in Egypt worse. Saltwater intrusion and a rise in sea level have ravaged as much as 15% of Egypt's most fertile farmland, which lies in the Nile Delta. Once salted, that land cannot be farmed. It reduces already limited agricultural space in Egypt. Experts argue that if this trend continues in the future, the country will stand in danger of having serious food insecurity problems in decades to come. Increasing population with a reduction of arable lands threatens Egypt from producing enough food for its citizens, and as such, Egypt is forced to look for alternatives outside its usual agricultural systems. This situation is exacerbated by the fact that Egypt is a significant food importer. Indeed, it imports close to 40% of its imported commodities as agricultural products. Egypt is among the biggest importers of wheat globally. The slightest ruffle in the global market will cause a gigantic problem in maintaining stability in the food supply. For instance, political instability in wheat-producing countries such as Ukraine and Russia led to an increase in food prices due to disturbances. Food dependency on external sources makes Egypt more vulnerable to changes in the global market. And with population growth, the pressure on Egypt's agricultural system becomes more evident. With the geographical constraints and challenges from climate change and population growth, new sources of sustenance become a necessity to ensure food security in the country. The importance of the Nile and water imports. The Nile River is the lifeblood of Egypt, playing an essential role in the country's survival and development. The vast majority of Egypt's population, around 90%, depends on the Nile for its water needs, which include drinking, irrigation, and industrial use. With such heavy reliance on a single water source, any disruption to the Nile's flow can have devastating consequences for the entire nation. The river flows through the entire length of Egypt, providing the fertile soil necessary for agriculture in a country otherwise surrounded by desert. The Nile is not only crucial for the daily lives of Egyptians, but also for the nation's food production, making it a vital resource for sustaining the population. However, the Nile is not an issue only for Egypt, since the river borders other countries in the Nile basin. The construction of dams by upstream nations, especially Ethiopia, has become a source of conflict. A recent example of a major project that threatens to disrupt the flow of water downstream to Egypt is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Ethiopia's intention to generate electricity by filling a large reservoir behind the dam has already led to reductions in the amount of water reaching Egypt. This situation has highlighted Egypt's vulnerability since it is entirely dependent on the Nile's water, and any change to the river's flow can have a serious impact on the country's water supply and agricultural output. As disputes over water resources escalate, so has the vulnerability of Egypt to disruptions in the Nile. Food imports, for instance, form much of Egypt's demand since there is not sufficient water for the production of local agricultural produce. Imports of food consist of 40% of Egypt's total imports, with a large portion of wheat, corn, and other staple crops imported from Russia and Ukraine. This reliance on extraneous sources of critical food staples is directly tied to the water that can be directed to domestic agriculture. In such an event where Nile flow was decreased or eradicated, this would continue and possibly lead to an enormous food insecurity for the agricultural sector within Egypt. Egypt has concentrated on finding new sources of water as measures to avoid the risks and protect its water. These include desalination and wastewater treatment. One of them is the New Delta Mega Project, which is expected to produce a more stable agricultural base through the exploitation of new sources of water, including groundwater and treated wastewater, in irrigating arid desert lands. However, after all these efforts, the Nile remains the primary source of water for Egypt, and the significance of this river to the survival and economic stability of the country cannot be overemphasized. International controversy over the water of the Nile and the inability of Egypt to produce adequate food locally sharpen the need for finding sustainable solutions to water management to ensure the future security of the nation. The New Delta Mega Project, a bold vision. The New Delta Mega Project represents one of Egypt's most ambitious initiatives aimed at addressing the country's growing water and food security challenges. This large-scale project envisions transforming vast areas of desert into fertile agricultural land, thus alleviating the pressures caused by the nation's limited arable space. The core of the project is the creation of an artificial river spanning 71 miles, which will provide water to irrigate millions of acres of desert land. This artificial river will be supported by 14 miles of underground pipes, which will carry treated groundwater and agricultural runoff, effectively recycling water for agricultural use. The project aims to cultivate over 2.2 million acres of land, offering a potential solution to Egypt's shrinking agricultural footprint. At the heart of the increase in agricultural capacity in Egypt lies the New Delta Mega Project. With fertile land shrinking in the country due to urban expansion and environmental challenges such as saltwater intrusion, the New Delta presents an opportunity to expand usable land for farming. The objective of the project is strategically to increase crops grown in Egypt and those on which the country mostly depends, for example, wheat, corn, soybeans, and vegetables. The government of Egypt hopes that through this new initiative, the country will be able to aid in the country's food security by enabling Egypt to produce surplus crops for export, thus reducing the importation of foods and stabilizing the economy. The New Delta Mega Project is a gigantic scale that requires huge investment and a centralized approach to planning. The Egyptian government has allocated over $5.8 billion for the project, which is far more than the initial estimates of $3.1 billion. The government is working with over 35 private companies, many of which handle key infrastructure elements such as land reclamation, road paving, and irrigation system construction. Because both public and private sectors need to collaborate to make the project a success, this kind of collaboration is necessary, as, through it, all the resources and expertise required to oversee an undertaking such as this can be shared. Egyptian officials say that the new Delta mega project has also been identified as an issue of national security. Much remains in the new Delta mega project despite the challenges it has had to face. The main issue here is desert natural conditions, and especially the danger of moving sand dunes that can slow down agricultural activity and even destroy infrastructure by blocking roads. Against this, the project planners are focusing on the methods that would stabilize the sand, either mechanically by lessening the exposure to wind erosion or through the use of vegetation to hold the dunes together. Additionally, the large-scale nature of the project raises questions concerning the feasibility in terms of cost and environmental impact. However, it can alter the face of Egypt's agriculture. Huge management and constant investment will be needed to sustain it in the long term. While the new Delta mega project promises to revolutionize Egypt's future, turning deserts into farmlands isn't as simple as it sounds. What's really at stake when it comes to transforming this barren land? Reclamation of desert land. Reclamation of desert land has been a key strategy for Egypt to expand its agricultural capacity and address its growing population's food security needs. Over the past several decades, the Egyptian government has been working to transform barren desert areas into productive farmland. This process typically involves tapping into groundwater resources and applying irrigation systems, which allow crops to be grown in areas that would otherwise be unsuitable for farming. Small-scale agricultural projects have already been established along the desert's edge, with farmers cultivating grains, fruits, and vegetables, some of which are even exported. However, the reclamation of desert land is not without its challenges, and the government has been working on scaling up efforts to make this strategy more widespread and sustainable. The method involved in desert reclamation is majorly the usage of central and drip irrigation systems, hence on groundwater. This process has been successful in some places, especially for local consumption. However, the process is very resource-intensive and costly. Water usage is very large in the irrigation of desert land, and, after passing some long periods, leads to the drain of the water reserve, if not time to time properly managed. While desert soil can be irrigated, it is far less fertile than the rich soils found along the Nile Delta. This often leads to lower yields than traditional farmland. Still, desert reclamation remains a very important part of Egypt's plan to expand its agricultural base in order to support its rapidly growing population. Desert reclamation projects have not had uniform results. Many of the newly developed areas have been abandoned a few years after they have been established. Irrigation often makes the soil unsuitable for long-term farming, which causes a gradual return of the land to desert conditions. This has been one of the main disappointments in Egypt's attempts at boosting agricultural production. As scholars have noted, desert land cannot exactly replace the fertile ground by the Nile, simply because it cannot promise better conditions to support further farming. Besides, the cost incurred in the construction of reclamation and irrigation structures is usually quite high, even for small farmers who lack significant capabilities to maintain their land. Despite these drawbacks, Egypt blinks no eyelashes, but keeps pushing desert land reclamation activities as utterly crucial to the future security of its food supplies. The new Delta mega project is one expansion of desert land reclamation since it hopes to reach millions of acres of desert lands. This tremendous mega project will draw in treated groundwaters and farm runoff in an attempt to diminish the pressure that these place upon Egypt's acutely overburdened aquifers. However, advanced irrigation systems and technology notwithstanding, the problems involved in desert reclamation persist. The government will have to evolve a system in such a way that reclamation land can remain productive over the long run and water resource usage is proper. Desert reclamation has been at the forefront of this country's needs for agriculture during the past 100 years, particularly with Egypt's population increasing by a tremendous amount and the fertility in supplied land dwindling. The technical and financial aspects of the new delta. The New Delta megaproject is a massive undertaking that requires a careful blend of technical expertise and substantial financial investment. The project's most notable feature is the creation of an artificial river designed to irrigate millions of acres of desert land, transforming it into fertile agricultural space. This artificial river will stretch for 71 miles, supported by 14 miles of underground pipes that will carry treated groundwater and agricultural runoff. The water will be processed at the Al Hammam station, ensuring that resources are utilized efficiently. The creation of these waterways is just one aspect of the project's ambitious scope, which also includes developing a robust infrastructure for land reclamation, irrigation, and transportation to support new farming communities. In terms of financial investment, the New Delta megaproject has been allocated an impressive $5.8 billion, significantly higher than the initial estimate of $3.1 billion when the project was first announced. The scale of the financial commitment underscores the importance of the project to Egypt's long-term development. This funding will cover the costs of building irrigation systems, roads, and the various facilities needed to support the agricultural infrastructure. The project also involves significant investment in land reclamation, which is a resource-intensive process requiring both technology and expertise to convert desert land into arable farmland. The high costs associated with this endeavor have raised concerns about whether the project can be completed within budget and on schedule. With such a colossal project, the Egyptian government is working in tandem with over 35 private companies, which form the backbone of this needed infrastructure. Such companies are responsible for building roads, installing pipes, and establishing irrigation systems, but most importantly, working on land reclamation. However, the involvement of private companies in this project will be necessary to ensure that the project benefits from technical expertise and resources that the public sector cannot provide alone. Again, this collaboration entails careful oversight and coordination to ensure that the project's goals are attained and that the land remains productive over the long haul. The New Delta megaproject is a national security priority for the Egyptian government, despite the technical and financial complexities involved. The project is considered critical to ensuring the availability of food and water resources for Egypt's increasing population, which is expected to exceed 160 million by 2050. The project falls within a greater initiative to recover desert land. It will be able to provide 15% more farmland, thus helping Egypt increase domestic food production and decrease reliance on imported food. However, rising costs and technical problems like soil suitability and water management make New Delta Mega a potential risk for a promising future solution for Egypt. Effective planning, coupled with the need for investment, will therefore be very essential in determining whether the mega project will thrive in the near future. Potential obstacles: sand and soil challenges. The New Delta mega project faces several significant challenges, particularly when it comes to managing the harsh desert environment in which it is being developed. One of the most pressing obstacles is the threat posed by shifting sand dunes, which can severely disrupt agricultural activities and infrastructure. As the project seeks to transform desert land into productive farmland, the constant movement of sand can block roads, cover irrigation systems, and even separate villages from one another. This makes it difficult to maintain the infrastructure required for effective farming, as sand accumulation can limit the flow of water and reduce its availability for crops, which could undermine the entire agricultural initiative. To mitigate the impact of sand dunes, the project planners are exploring two main approaches: mechanical and biological stabilization. The mechanical approach involves using rocky materials to reduce the exposure of land to wind erosion, which would help prevent the dunes from shifting. Additionally, plants are being introduced to act as natural barriers, fixing the sand dunes in place and preventing them from spreading. These plants help bind the sand together, providing a more sustainable solution to the problem. While these methods show promise, they require continuous effort and monitoring to ensure their effectiveness over time, especially given the scale of the project. Another challenge is the quality of desert soil. Desert soils are not as fertile as those found in the Nile Delta, even when irrigation systems are established. This makes it difficult to reach the same yields in agriculture. Reclaimed land, even with modern irrigation techniques and groundwater use, may not yield as much as Egypt's traditional farming areas. The soil in arid regions will often be deprived of the nutrient requirements for productive crop growth, and farmers may have to apply a lot of fertilizers and other soil treatment chemicals to continue crop production. The extra costs would make the restored land less economical, especially when the quality of the soil does not improve with time. It thus reveals that sand and soil issues constitute part of the intricate complexities of the New Delta mega project. Success with such a gargantuan venture requires that environmental difficulties, which would otherwise stall a successful effort to enlarge the agricultural capacity in Egypt, are surmounted. Though the government has sought to curb these challenges from the outset with soil analysis and the utilization of innovative agricultural techniques, the sustainability of the project in the long term will depend on the effectiveness of that effort. The impact of the Ethiopian dam and Nile water disputes. The construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, has significantly altered the dynamics of water access and distribution within the Nile basin, intensifying the already tense relationship between Egypt and Ethiopia. As Egypt depends on the Nile for 90% of its water, any disruption to its flow poses a direct threat to the country's water security and agricultural capacity. Ethiopia's decision to build the GERD to generate hydroelectric power has led to disagreements over how the dam would impact the downstream flow of water into Egypt and Sudan. While Ethiopia argues that the dam will provide essential power for its population, Egypt sees it as a potential threat to its vital water supply, which already faces pressure from its growing population and limited resources. The dispute over the dam has heightened Egypt's concerns about its control over the Nile's water, especially since Egypt and Sudan have historically held agreements granting them a larger share of the Nile's resources. The 1929 Water Agreement, a colonial-era treaty, allocated 90% of the Nile's water to Egypt and Sudan, with Egypt receiving the largest share. However, Ethiopia and other upstream countries have never recognized this agreement, leading to a broader regional conflict over the use and rights to the Nile's water. Ethiopia's construction of the GERD, without a binding agreement with Egypt and Sudan, has further strained relations, with Egypt fearing that the dam will significantly reduce its share of water, especially during the dam's filling stages. The current issue of Nile water disputes has greater implications for water security in Egypt. Filling the GERD reservoir by Ethiopia reduces the flowing water into the country, which currently faces a threat of water shortages. The same situation becomes dangerous because 95% of the Egyptian population resides only in a few kilometers along the Nile River in the only cultivated area. Any reduction in the flow of water in the river would directly hinder the irrigation of crops in Egypt and thus make the food security problem worse. Secondly, it will also reduce the supply of water to the already increasing population in Egypt, which puts a greater demand on the strained resources of the Nile. With tensions rising over the Nile, Egypt can't afford to rely on just one source of water anymore. So, what's the next big move to secure the future? Future water solutions, desalination and hydroponics. As Egypt grapples with its ongoing water scarcity, future water solutions are becoming increasingly important to ensure the country can meet its growing demand. One of the most promising technologies in addressing Egypt's water needs is desalination. The country has already begun to invest heavily in desalination plants, with plans to significantly increase capacity over the next few decades. The Egyptian government is working to build 47 new desalination plants over the next 5 years, all powered by solar energy. These plants will have the potential to produce up to 740 million gallons of fresh water per day, with the possibility of doubling that capacity in the future. If these projects are successful, desalination could play a key role in reducing Egypt's reliance on the Nile, offering a more sustainable and independent source of water for its citizens. Desalination is particularly vital for Egypt because it can provide water to coastal regions, where the demand for fresh water is high. However, while desalination technology offers great promise, it also comes with high operational costs, primarily due to the energy required for the desalination process. Egypt is addressing this challenge by harnessing solar energy to power its desalination plants, which could help reduce costs in the long term. The integration of renewable energy into water production is an important step toward making desalination a more economically viable solution. Despite its benefits, desalination remains a resource-intensive process, and Egypt must carefully balance its use with other water-saving technologies to ensure long-term sustainability. Hydroponics is another technology that has the potential to revolutionize agriculture in Egypt, especially in water-scarce areas. Hydroponics is a soilless method of farming, which allows growing plants in controlled environments, such as greenhouses, using nutrient-rich water. It uses significantly less water than traditional farming, and therefore is best suited for water-scarce regions like Egypt. Hydroponics consumes only about 10% of the water that is consumed in traditional farming methods. Considering the acute shortage of water in Egypt, this technology may be the only way the country can use its water to produce more crops and not stress the already limited supply of water for further food production. If you found this story as mind-blowing as we did, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible content. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Check out the next video on your screen for even more jaw-dropping insights. See you there.